every Australian backyard from 1945 to 2026. The galvanised steel Hills Hoist, 4 arms, concrete set base, kids climbing it, Christmas washing in the summer sun, sheets drying at the far edge of the quarter-acre block. Australia's greatest backyard icon. Invented in Adelaide by a returned serviceman. Made at Edwardstown for 57 years. Featured in the 2000 Sydney Olympics closing ceremony. 30th of December 2016. Griffon Corporation of 712 Fifth Avenue, Manhattan, buys the Hills Home Living brand, including the Hills Hoist, for 8.4 million Australian dollars. Manufacturing moves to China. The Edwardstown factory is demolished. Its groundwater is found to contain vinyl chloride. More than 2,200 South Plympton and Edwardstown residents are notified. The site is redeveloped as Castle Plaza shopping centre. How did Australia's greatest backyard icon end up as a New York-owned brand, made in China, standing on a poisoned Adelaide aquifer? Before we go any further, if you want to keep these stories alive, I've created a book with the complete Australian lost factories. The workers, the gates, the Australian maid, all gone. The link is on the first line of the description. Back to the story. Chapter 1. Castle Plaza, 2026. Walk to 944 to 956 South Road, Edwardstown and Adelaide, 10 kilometres south of central Adelaide, suburban South Australia, where Hills Industries Limited's flagship factory stood from 1954 to August 2011, where the Hills Hoist was manufactured for 57 years. Australia's greatest backyard icon, galvanised steel, 4 arms, winding mechanism, concrete set base, built on this 10-acre South Road site by South Australian workers for over half a century. What's there in 2026? Castle Plaza, a shopping centre expansion, Bunnings, Officeworks, Coles, Kmart, concrete slabs, car park, loading bays, retail floor space. And under the Castle Plaza concrete, the groundwater aquifer. In February 2011, the South Australian Environment Protection Authority wrote to more than 2,200 residents of South Plympton and Edwardstown, warning of groundwater contamination. The primary contaminant, vinyl chloride, a known carcinogen, above Australian drinking water guidelines. South Australian EPA Chief Executive Helen Fulcher and Environment Minister Paul Caker handled the response. The Minister told South Australian Parliament the EPA had first been alerted in August 2009. Historical industrial contamination. Hills Industries had operated on the site from 1954 to 2011. Meanwhile, at Bunnings, a modern Hills Hoist, 6-line clothesline, traditional galvanised steel, cast aluminium components, 4-metre head diameter, Hills lifetime warranty, 579 Australian dollars, made in China. The Hills Hoist you can buy in Australia in 2026 is not made in Australia, owned by Griffon Corporation. Headquarters, 712 Fifth Avenue, New York City, sold to America on the 30th of December 2016. Purchase price 8.4 million Australian dollars. Read that again. 8.4 million for the Hills Home Living brand, Australia's greatest backyard icon. This is the story of how a South Australian returned serviceman's 1945 backyard invention, the physical symbol of Australia's post-war domestic reconstruction, ended up as a New York-owned brand, manufactured in China, sold at Bunnings, standing on the concrete of a shopping centre that was built over an Adelaide factory that was demolished after its groundwater was found to contain vinyl chloride. Chapter 2. Bevington Road, Rewind, 1945, Glenunga, Adelaide, Bevington Road, a small suburban block in a South Australian working-class neighbourhood. A returned serviceman named Lancelot Leonard Hill, Lance, is in his backyard. He is 42 years old, born 15th of December 1902 at Knoxville, Adelaide. Second child of Alfred William Hill, a slaughterman, and Lillian Ethel Nee Mott, educated at Glen Osmond Public School. At 14, joined the family bacon factory and cannery, earned a steam engineer's certificate at 16, ran boilers through his late teens, raced Indian and AJS motorcycles on Adelaide dirt track speedways through the 1920s, gave speedboat joyrides at the Glenelg Jetty, opened a motor garage in Prospect through the 1930s. Physically, 5 feet 7 inches, spectacled. Per the Australian Dictionary of Biography, gregarious, witty, and liked by all who met him. Then, 7th of January 1942, Lance closes his Prospect garage, enlists in the militia, rises to Acting Warrant Officer Class 2 in September 1942. Transfers to the Australian Imperial Force in October 1942. His National Archives Service Dossier, number B883, service number SX25726, documents the war role. He remained in South Australia, instructing motor mechanics and motorbike dispatch riders for the war effort. He did not deploy to the Middle East. He did not deploy to New Guinea. He did not serve in combat overseas. Lance Hill served the Australian war effort from Adelaide, training the young Australian mechanics and dispatch riders who would keep the military vehicles running in the theatre. His engineering skill and speedway background made him one of Australia's best motor mechanic instructors of the war years. Discharged from the Army in August 1945. Home to Sherry, Cynthia Harriet. Mary Sherry Hill nee Carpenter Langman, a saleswoman and divorcee whom he had married on the 4th of October 1939 at Payne. Ham Methodist Church. And Sherry, as the story goes, has a complaint. The citrus trees at Bevington Road have overgrown the backyard. There is no room to hang washing on the single-wire clothesline. She needs somewhere to dry the family sheets and shirts. Lance walks out to the backyard with an oxyacetylene torch. His father, Alfred, has straightened old pipes from various sources. War surplus aeroplane wire, salvaged from damaged Australian military aircraft, is available. Anti-submarine mesh salvaged from Sydney Harbour is available. And Lance builds Sherry a rotary clothesline. Post-war Adelaide in 1945 is a suburban working-class city rebuilding itself. Housing is scarce, materials are scarce, steel is rationed, petrol is rationed. Australian returned servicemen are being demobilised in tens of thousands and returned to families they haven't seen in 3 or 4 years. The Australian government's post-war reconstruction plan promises the returned soldier a house, a quarter-acre block, a family, and a suburban life. Lance Hill has all of those things in Glenunga in November 1945. He has Sherry. He has the Bevington Road backyard. He has a father, Alf, with a garage full of old pipes. He has his own oxyacetylene torch and steam engineering skills from the family bacon factory decades earlier. And he has access to war surplus materials that would have been unavailable to anyone not connected to the Australian military logistics chain. Sherry's overgrown citrus complaint is the trigger. Lance's engineering solution, a rotary hoist that wound down for laundry and wound up out of the way, becomes, over the next 12 months, the founding of Hills Industries. Chapter 3. 10 Guineas, November 1945. Lance Hill runs his first classified advertisement in the Advertiser newspaper, Adelaide. Rotary Clothes Hoist, 10 guineas, £10 and 10 shillings, plus £1 delivery and installation, plus an extra 5 shillings if set in concrete. 6 orders come in, most from women, from other Adelaide suburbs. Word of mouth spreads through post-war Adelaide. But here's the honest thing. Lance Hill did not invent the rotary clothesline. Gilbert Toyne of Geelong patented 4 different rotary clothes hoist designs between 1911 and 1946. First patent, 1911, Australian patent number 1276 of 11. A windable version, patented 1925, used a crown, wheel and pinion winding mechanism. Toyne's hoists were high quality but too expensive to become popular. He never scaled. Then Gerhard Popp Keisler, a South Australian inventor working through the interwar years, built a metre-high wooden rotary prototype about 2 decades before Lance Hill did. Keisler sold the model and the plans to Lance Hill, Lance's brother-in-law Harold Ling. Harold Eustace Hill Ling, born 1907, died 1966, tried and failed to buy the right to use Toyn's patented winding mechanism. In late 1946, Hill designed his own version, identical to Toyn's expired 1925 patent. Toyn's patents had expired. Hill was legally free to use the design. Lance Hill's genius was not invention, it was industrial commercialisation. All steel construction, no wood to rot in the Australian sun and rain. Aggressive 10 guinea pricing, cheaper than any prior rotary clothesline. A lifetime guarantee, a promise no competitor matched. Vertical family manufacturing. Lance welded. His father Alf straightened pipes. Wife Sherry painted the hoists. Brother-in-law Harold Ling ran accounts and marketing. By February 1946, the Hill family was working 16-hour days in the Bevington Road backyard, painting each finished hoist with Sherry's own brush, delivering each unit by handcart. Postwar Adelaide had never seen anything like it, and postwar Adelaide bought them. Chapter 4. Edwardstown. 1947, Hills opens a Sydney branch, displays a hoist at the 1947 Sydney Royal Easter Show. Word spreads across the eastern states. January 1948, company formally incorporated. Hills Hoist Limited. Lance Hill as chairman. Harold Ling as director. Alfred Hill as capital provider. Production sequence: first at Bevington Road, backyard, Glenunga. Then leased land on Glen Osmond Road, Fullarton. Then, in 1954, the 10-acre site at 944 to 956 South Road, Edwardstown. Purchased outright. Former A. Pengelly and Company coach building factory. 4 hectares in what was then the industrial south of Adelaide. This is the Edwardstown factory. This becomes the physical home of the Hills Hoist for 57 years. By 1954, 600 hoists a week rolling off the Edwardstown line. By 1957, Australia's largest maker of rotary clotheslines, diversification into playground swings, folding chairs, laundry trolleys, ironing boards, children's play equipment. Overseas factories: Auckland, New Zealand, 1958. Caerphilly, Wales, 1959. 1955 to 56, Hills Antenna business starts. Purpose: to supply antennas for the 1956 Melbourne Olympic Games television broadcast. By 1957, Hills is Australia's largest antenna producer. 1958, public company. Hills Industries Limited on the Australian Stock Exchange. 1967, first purpose-built metal tubing factory at O'Sullivan Beach, 20 kilometres south of Adelaide. But 1956, a warning event. Lance Hill suffers a major cardiac incident on a New Zealand trade mission. On medical advice, he resigns from operational control, sells his shares to Harold Ling, stays on as consultant. Harold Ling becomes chairman. Lance Hill is 54 years old. He has, in 11 years, built the biggest rotary clothesline manufacturer in Australia. From 6 orders in Adelaide in November 1945 to a national industrial company employing hundreds of workers at Edwardstown. And then he steps back. Harold Ling runs Hills Industries through the 1960s and 70s. Expands the antenna business into a national television installation supplier. Diversifies further into steel tubing, exhausts, and industrial products. Public listing on the Australian Stock Exchange stabilises the company as a mid-cap Adelaide industrial firm. When Harold Ling dies in 1966, the company is thriving. His son and later grandchildren, continue the family involvement through the Hill Ling name, a hybrid family designation reflecting the marriage of the Hill and Ling lines that founded the company. Meanwhile, the Edwardstown factory becomes an institutional part of southern Adelaide's industrial identity. Alongside Chrysler's Tonsley Park, alongside GAMH Woodville, alongside Actrol Parts and dozens of other South Australian manufacturing plants, Edwardstown makes the Hills Hoist for Australian families every week for over half a century. Chapter 5. Cyclone Tracy. Christmas Eve, 1974. Darwin, Cyclone Tracy hits at Christmas, winds recorded at over 200 kilometres an hour before the anemometer failed. 70% of Darwin's houses destroyed. 71 people dead. The Australian government evacuates most of Darwin's population. In the aftermath, one particular Darwin family reports to Australian press that the only thing left standing in their backyard was their Hills Hoist. Galvanised steel 4-arm rotary, concrete set base intact, still spinning, in wind that flattened brick houses. That story runs across Australian newspapers through 1975. The Hills Hoist becomes not just a household object, it becomes a symbol of Australian durability, of the post-war galvanised steel manufacturing tradition, of the returned serviceman inventor's engineering ethos, of a product built to last a lifetime, the Hills lifetime warranty made physically literal. And by 1974, the Hills Hoist has already become deeper cultural currency. Robin Boyd's 1960 book, The Australian Ugliness, the intellectual anchor for suburban critique, coined the term featureism. Robin Boyd verbatim: "There is little or no collective pride in the suburb, only a huge collection of individual prides." Painter Howard Arkley, 1951 to 1999, Dayglow Suburban Paintings. Triple Fronted, 1988, Family Home, Suburban Exterior, 1993. Represented Australia at the 1999 Venice Biennale. Barry Humphries Sketches, John Brack Paintings. The Hills Hoist becomes shorthand for a whole set of Australian ideas. The quarter-acre block, the baby boom family, the suburban dream, the post-war domestic reconstruction, the physical answer to the question, how did Australia rebuild itself after 1945? Meanwhile, Lance Hill, retired from operational control since 1956, lives quietly in Adelaide through the 1960s and 70s. He watches his rotary clothesline become an Australian cultural icon. By the time he dies in March 1986, aged 83, at Largs Bay, over 1 million Hills Hoists have been sold across Australia and New Zealand. Chapter 6. The Closing Ceremony, 1st of October 2000. Stadium, Australia, Sydney. Olympic Games. Closing Ceremony. Attendance, 114,714. The largest in-stadium attendance in modern Olympic history. Artistic Director David Atkins. Director of Ceremonies Rick Birch. The closing ceremony includes a segment titled Let's Party. It is designed to be an Australian backyard. Barbecues, eclectic music, stilt-walking performers. David Atkins on the choreography of the segment, verbatim: "We have decided to invite everyone into our giant Australian backyard, fully equipped with Hills Hoists, barbecues, an eclectic mix of music, performers." Hills Hoist in stilt-walking performer harnesses. Aluminium tubing frames, designed by John King. Made by Will Norton and Anthony Neeson at the Ceremonies Workshop, Everleigh, Sydney. The Powerhouse Museum in Sydney holds one of the actual harness props today, object number 504164. Australia introduces itself to the world on the biggest global stage of the year 2000, using the Hills Hoist as a national symbol. Meanwhile, The Hills Hoist is still being manufactured at Edwardstown, still galvanised Australian steel, still made by Australian workers, still selling to Australian families. Hills Industries Limited is at its financial peak, approximately $1 billion Australian dollars in revenue in the financial year 2000. Same year, same country. Nissan Clayton had been closed for 8 years. Mitsubishi Adelaide Tonsley Park was still running. Ford Broadmeadows was still running. Holden Elizabeth was still running. Toyota Altona was still running. Australian manufacturing looked from Stadium Australia like it was thriving. From that stage, from that ceremony, from that global broadcast, no one could see the offshoring wave coming. But it was coming. Chapter 7. Ted Pretty, 3rd of September 2012. Hills Holdings Limited, the successor to Hills Industries Limited, appoints a new Group Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Edward Ted Pretty, born 1957 in Darwin, ex-Telstra Head of Technology and Innovation. A corporate technology executive with no manufacturing background, named to succeed retiring Managing Director Graham Twartz. Pretty's diagnosis of the company he inherited, verbatim to Connected magazine. When I joined the business less than 2 years ago, we had 28 different businesses, so we sold the other businesses, paid down our debt and integrated the company. We decided we wanted to be the market leader in the AVA and comms space. 28. 8 businesses, down to one focus, audio visual and communications. Not manufacturing, not the Hills Hoist. AV and comms. Per SBS News reporting on the era, Hills cut about 13% of its workforce and sold off several manufacturing businesses, and suffered a $94 million loss in 2012 to 13 as a result of the restructure's cost, before returning to the black the following year. 13% workforce cut, $94 million loss. 2013 divestitures. Orcon Steel sold to BlueScope in August. Corvest divested. Healthcare businesses divested. December 2013, Pretty renames the company. Hills Limited. Dropping industries. Dropping holdings. Dropping the manufacturing identity entirely. The word industries, which the company had carried since 1958, was gone from the corporate identity. Chairman Jennifer Hill-Ling, the surviving prominent Hill/Ling family name from the founder generation, announces Pretty's departure in 2015, verbatim from her ASX statement. The board has recently reviewed and refined the company's strategy. After discussing the refined strategy with Ted, we have agreed that this is the time for a change in executive leadership. Grant Logan takes over as CEO in 2015. Then David Lenz. Under Lenz, Hills makes one more attempt to keep the Hoist Australian-owned. December 2014, Hills licenses its home living brands, including the Hills Hoist, to Woolworths for sale through Woolworths Masters hardware chain. This is Hills Limited's face-saving arrangement. Retain the brand ownership, license the manufacturing and distribution to Woolworths. Then in January 2016, Woolworths announces it is closing the Masters hardware chain. The last day of Masters trading is 11th of December, 2016. The Woolworths license deal collapses. The home living portfolio, the Hills Hoist itself, becomes surplus to a technology-focused Hills Limited. Enter Griffon Corporation, New York. The 18 months between the Masters closure announcement in January 2016 and the Griffon acquisition in December 2016 are the end game. Hills Limited is publicly a technology company, but its home living portfolio, the Hills Hoist, the ironing boards, the laundry products, the retractable Quartermatic clotheslines, is still on its books. Still generating some revenue, still carrying the Australian family brand equity, but strategically homeless. The home living portfolio needs a buyer, and the Australian buyer market for a heritage brand home living portfolio in 2016 is thin. Australian retail hardware is dominated by Bunnings, which is not a manufacturer. Australian consumer goods manufacturers had themselves been consolidating and offshoring for 2 decades. The domestic buyer pool was small. The international buyer pool was different. Global consumer hardware holding companies with international distribution networks, offshore manufacturing capacity, and portfolios of heritage brands were actively acquiring across Asia Pacific. Griffon Corporation of New York fit the profile perfectly. Chapter 8, December 30th, 2016. 30th of December 2016. New York, USA. Griffon Corporation. 712 Fifth Avenue, Manhattan. NYSE listing, GFF. Diversified Holding Company. Founded 1949 as Instrument Systems Corporation. Renamed Griffon in 1995 by Harvey R. Blau, 1935 to 2018, after the mythical creature that was half eagle, half lion. Owns the Ames companies of Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. True Temper Hand Tools, Closet-Made Storage, Hunter Fans, Clopay Garage Doors, Telephonics Defence Electronics, and Ames Australasia, the Australian and New Zealand subsidiary that already owns Cyclone Garden Tools, Nilex, Trojan Buckets, Northcote Pottery, Southern Patio. Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board, Ronald Yardley Kramer, CEO since April 2008. Chairman since January 2018. Married Harvey Blau's daughter, Stephanie, in 1992. Blau was the executive who renamed the company Griffon in 1995 and Kramer's future father-in-law. President of the AMS companies, Michael A. Sarika. Chief Executive Officer of AMS Australasia, Simon Andrew Hupfeld, the deal document. Griffon's own Securities and Exchange Commission. Form 10Q filing verbatim. On December 30th, 2016, AMEs Australia acquired Hills Home Living for approximately $6,051,000 US, or $8,400,000 Australian dollars. The purchase price was primarily allocated to intangible assets of approximately $6,400,000 Australian dollars. 8.4 million Australian dollars. For the Hills Home Living brand, including the Hills Hoist itself, 6.4 million of that allocated to intangibles, trademarks, intellectual property, customer relationships. The rest to inventory and tooling. Simon Hupfeld to SBS News and Australian Associated Press on the 3rd of January 2017, verbatim. We consider this a tremendous development for our business and have great confidence that the many customers, employees and suppliers of Hills will enjoy the benefits of this new ownership structure. Tremendous development, new ownership structure, American corporate language, delivered from a Melbourne office. Hills CEO David Lentz's rationalisation, verbatim, the Hills of today is a value-added distributor of technology products and services. It is important that we remain focused on our core business activities. Focused. Core business. The Hills Hoist, the product Lance Hill had built in his Glenunga backyard in 1945, was no longer core to Hills Limited. Ronald Kramer to Griffon shareholders in the Griffon Corporation 2017 full-year results, verbatim. 2017 has been a transformational year for Griffon. We have significantly grown our HBP segment through the acquisitions of Closet Made, Hills, La Hacienda, Tuscan Path and Harper. Hills, Australia's greatest backyard icon, listed alongside 4 other US, UK and Australian consumer hardware brands. In a Griffon quarterly earnings letter, from a Fifth Avenue, Manhattan office. Chapter 9. China. From 2017 onward. Griffon Corporation and AME's Australasia begin what Simon Hupfeld promised, to revitalise a range that includes clotheslines and laundry products. The revitalisation includes moving manufacturing offshore, per Hills' own current product manual for the heritage rotary hoist, hosted on hillshome.com.au, page 2 states, verbatim, made in China. Corroborated by trade publications, The Clothesline Store, clotheslines.com, and consumer product reviews on productreview.com.au. The Hills Hoist that Australian families buy at Bunnings in 2026 is manufactured in China. The galvanised steel, Chinese. The cast aluminium components, Chinese. The 4-metre head diameter, Chinese assembly. The Hills lifetime warranty, administered from AME's Australasia's Australian office, but on Chinese-made product. Retail pricing at Bunnings Current. Hills Hoist, 6-line clothesline, $579 Australian dollars. Hills 65-metre woodland grey rotary, $449. Australian-made competitors survive. Austral, galvanised, Australian-made, $569 to $599. Daytech, Australian-made, $349 to $389. As of 2018, per industry reporting, Australa and Daytech are the only remaining Australian manufacturers of rotary clotheslines still building on Australian soil. Meanwhile, the Hills Hoist still commands a premium at Bunnings, because Australian consumers still remember the galvanised steel Cyclone Tracy Survivor Hills Hoist from the 1970s, even though the modern product is not that product. Consumer reviews on productreview.com.au, verbatim from customer feedback. Hills Hoist heritage definitely not like the old ones. Very thin, poor quality bay steel. The brand survives. The badge survives. The premium survives. The Australian manufacturing chain did not. Chapter 10. O'Sullivan Beach, 30th of December 2019. 3 years to the day after the Griffon acquisition, Hills Limited, now purely a technology and communications company, no longer connected to the hoist, closes its last South Australian manufacturing plant, O'Sullivan Beach, 20 kilometres south of Adelaide, the 1967 purpose-built metal tubing factory that had made antennas for decades. 14 workers on the line, 6 to be redeployed. Total remaining Hills employees in South Australia, 60, down from hundreds at Edwardstown's peak. Australian Manufacturing Workers Union. South Australia Secretary Peter Bauer confirms the closure to Australian press, $1.4 million Australian dollars redundancy bill, but then a partial recovery, an important Australian counter-narrative. In late 2019, the Hills antenna business is sold to the Biolecki Group, Batek Proprietary Limited, and moved to Lonsdale, South Australia, about 25 kilometres south of Adelaide. Production restarts on the 3rd of February 2020. Hills Antenna, under Bitek ownership, remains Australian-owned and certified Australian-made. One Hills product line came home. One did not. Meanwhile, the Edwardstown factory site, the physical birthplace of the Hills Hoist, is dealt with. Hills Industries had already exited Edwardstown by August 2011. In February 2011, the SAEPA notified more than 2,200 residents of South Plympton and Edwardstown of groundwater contamination from historical industrial activity on the site. Vinyl chloride, a known carcinogen, above Australian drinking water guidelines. SAEPA Chief Executive Helen Fulcher and South Australian Environment Minister Paul Kaika handled the response. The Environment Minister told South Australian Parliament the EPA had first been alerted in August 2009. Groundwater remediation. Site demolition. Redevelopment as the Castle Plaza shopping centre expansion. The birthplace of Australia's greatest backyard icon became retail floor space over remediated aquifer. Contextualise the contamination. Vinyl chloride is a chemical used in the production of PVC plastics, a chemical that Hills Industries would have used in various forms across its diversified product range from the 1950s onward. Groundwater contamination of this type was, in the mid-20th century Australian industrial context, common at large manufacturing sites. It was not specific to Hills. It was specific to the ERA of Australian industrial practice. But the physical outcome is what matters for the story. Every kilogram of Australia's greatest backyard icon that was built at 944 South Road between 1954 and August 2011 was made on top of an aquifer that would later be found contaminated with vinyl chloride above Australian drinking water guidelines. When Hills exited, when the demolition happened, when the SAEPA notification went out to 2,200 residents, the physical inheritance of Australia's Hills Hoist manufacturing was a poisoned Adelaide aquifer, remediated, then paved over as a shopping centre. The Castle Plaza shopping centre stands today on that remediated ground, sold with modern Chinese-made Hills Hoists at Bunnings in the very shopping centre built over the Australian factory that used to make them. Chapter 11. The Backyard, 2026. Walk to a suburban Australian backyard, anywhere from Perth to Cairns to Hobart, on a Saturday afternoon in summer. Sheets, shirts, kids' school uniforms drying in the sun. And you will find, still in dozens of thousands of Australian backyards, the surviving 1950s, 60s, 70s Hills Hoist, galvanised Australian steel. Winding mechanism still working, forearms still spinning, concrete base still intact, made in Adelaide, at Edwardstown, before it was demolished, before it was contaminated, before it was Castle Plaza. Meanwhile, at Bunnings, the modern Hills Hoist, $579, made in China, owned by Griffon Corporation, 712 Fifth Avenue, New York. Cast aluminium components, thinner than the original galvanised steel, lifetime warranty, but consumers report the modern product doesn't last like the original. Meanwhile, at Bevington Road, Glenunga, Lance Hill's backyard, where the first hoist was built in 1945, is still a residential street. No plaque, no historical marker, nothing to indicate that Australia's greatest backyard icon was invented in this specific backyard by a returned serviceman named Lancelot Leonard Hill in November 1945. Just houses. Meanwhile, at 944 South Road, Edwardstown, the Castle Plaza shopping centre. Bunnings, Officeworks, Coles, Kmart, retail, parking, under the concrete, the remediated vinyl chloride aquifer. Meanwhile, at Payneham Methodist Church, Adelaide, where Lance married Sherry on the 4th of October 1939, the building still stands. Meanwhile, at 712 Fifth Avenue, Manhattan, New York, Griffon Corporation continues to grow. Ronald Kramer continues as CEO and chairman. The Hills Hoist is one of dozens of consumer hardware brands in the Griffon portfolio, alongside True Temper garden tools, closet-made storage, Hunter fans, Clopay garage doors. And every Bunnings, Mitre 10 and Kmart across Australia sells the Chinese-made Hills Hoist under the Australian family brand name. The badge survives. The Australia in it did not. The 1950s, 60s and 70s. Hills Hoist still spinning in Australian backyards today are the last physical remnants of a manufacturing chain that Lance Hill started in Glenunga in 1945, that Harold Ling ran from Edwardstown from 1954, that Ted Pretty pivoted away from in 2012 to 2015, and that Griffon Corporation completed the severance of on the 30th of December 2016. When those units rust out over the next 20 years, the physical Australian-made Hills Hoist ends. Permanently. Lesson 1. The founder story was never the whole story. Lance Hill did not invent the rotary clothesline. Gilbert Toyne of Geelong patented rotary clothesline designs from 1911. Gerhard Popp Kaesler of South Australia built a wooden prototype about 2 decades before Lance did. Kaesler sold the prototype and plans directly to Lance Hill. Lance's brother-in-law, Harold Ling, tried and failed to buy Toyne's patent rights. Lance then designed a winding mechanism identical to Toyne's expired 1925 patent. Read that again. Lance Hill was not the inventor. He was the commercializer. What Lance Hill actually contributed was industrial commercialisation, all-steel construction, 10 guinea pricing, lifetime guarantee, vertical family manufacturing, and critically, the marketing genius to turn a rotary clothesline into the icon of Australian post-war domestic reconstruction. Industrial South has told 39 stories now. Halverson's Lars Ivan generational transition, Franklin's Robertson exit at the peak, Arnott's William with £14 in Newcastle, Chrysler's Detroit engineering, Nissan Clayton's Yokohama boardroom. Every founder story is more complicated than the brand marketing tells. The genius is rarely in the invention. The genius is in the commercialisation, the timing, the industrial execution, and the family labour that turns a prototype into a national icon. Lance Hill's actual genius was building a family factory in Adelaide that put a rotary clothesline into over 1 million Australian backyards. That is a real achievement. It just isn't the returning soldier invented it in his backyard Christmas 1945 story that the brand tells. The truth is more interesting. A returned serviceman with a mechanical engineering background bought a rejected prior art prototype from Popp Kaesler, ripped off a legally expired winding mechanism patent from Gilbert Toyne, built the Toyne design in galvanised steel instead of wood, at half the price. Then, with his family working 16-hour days in the Bevington Road backyard, delivered the first 6 hoists by handcart in November 1945. By 1954, he had a factory at Edwardstown making 600 hoists a week. By his death in 1986, he had sold over 1 million. That is a genuine Australian industrial commercial achievement. It just wasn't the invention it's remembered as. Lesson 2. Australian executives chose the offshoring before America arrived. Ted Pretty took over Hills Limited on the 3rd of September 2012. He was Australian, born in Darwin, former Telstra. He inherited a diversified 28-business Australian manufacturer at the end of a 50-year run of family badge success. He decided, verbatim to Connected magazine, "We wanted to be the market leader in the audio-visual and communication space. Not manufacturing, not the Hills Hoist, audio-visual and communications distribution." Under Pretty's 3-year tenure from 2012 to 2015, Hills Limited divested Orcon Steel, Corvest and its healthcare businesses, cut 13% of the workforce, posted a $94 million restructure loss. Then, in December 2013, Pretty renamed the company Hills Limited, dropping industries, dropping holdings, dropping the manufacturing identity entirely. His successor David Lenz continued the pivot. When the Woolworths Masters license deal collapsed in 2016, the home living portfolio, including the Hills Hoist, was already surplus to a technology-focused Hills Limited. Griffon Corporation of New York arrived with 8.4 million Australian dollars on the 30th of December 2016, and Hills Limited sold. Here's the honest thing. The title of this video says, "How America Destroyed." But America did not destroy the Hills Hoist. America bought a brand that Australian executives, chaired by an Australian descendant of the founding family, Jennifer Hill Ling, had already resolved to shed. The Griffon acquisition was the moment of completion, not the moment of choice. The choice was made in Adelaide by Australian executives 4 years earlier. When an Australian company decides its future is not in making things, the American buyer is not the villain. The American buyer is the buyer of last resort. Someone was always going to complete the sale. The pattern holds across industrial South ships. Franklin Robertson chose to exit at the peak, before any American buyer arrived. Arnott's, the Arnott family, sold to Campbell across 12 years before KKR arrived. Nissan Clayton, the Button plan and the Yokohama losses drove the decision, before the plant was closed. Hills Hoist follows the same pattern, Australian decision first, American completion second. Lesson 3. The badge survives, the backyard doesn't. Every industrial history the industrial South Channel has told ends the same way. The badge survives, the empire doesn't. Franklin still sold as a concept caravan under a different corporate roof. Arnott's, Tim Tam still made, but under KKR ownership. Nissan Clayton, Nissan still selling imports. And now Hills Hoist, still on the Bunnings shelf. Still galvanised, still 4 arms, still spinning. Owned by Griffon Corporation, 712 Fifth Avenue, Manhattan. Made in China. Delivered to Australian backyards. But when the Hills Hoist that stood in 1974 Darwin backyards through Cyclone Tracy, that specific product, that specific galvanised steel Edwardstown made unit that was built to last a lifetime, those units are gone. The last of them are in Australian backyards today, spinning slowly, owned by grandchildren of the families who bought them new in the 1960s and 70s. When those units rust out over the next 20 years, the physical continuity of the Australian-made Hills Hoist will end. The Chinese-made Hills Hoist that replaces them is not the same product, same badge, same brand, different country of manufacture, different steel gauge, different quality control system. No returned serviceman inventor, no Adelaide factory, no Sherry Hill painting each unit by hand. No Alf Hill straightening pipes on a Glenunga porch. Just a supply chain contract between Griffon Corporation's Manhattan office and a Chinese contract manufacturer, servicing an Australian retail contract at Bunnings. When an industrial empire falls to offshoring, the badge survives on the artefacts. The manufacturing chain does not. Not as the same chain, not with the same country, not with the same steel. The Hills Hoist on the Bunnings shelf in 2026 is a memento of the empire Lance Hill built. The empire is history. $8.4 million. Edwardstown 2016. The backyard remembers. The factory does not.